Anatomy of the nose. We are going to have that the nose is going to be placed in the center of the face, under the forehead, above the upper lip and between the cheeks. It is described as the shape of a pyramid whose main axis is directed from top to bottom and from back to front. In the morphology of the nose, one can distinguish three faces, of which two are lateral, flat, inclined towards the cheeks, fixed in the upper part by resting on the skeleton bone and movable in the lower part. This area corresponds to the wings of the nose. The other corresponds to a posterior face represented by two channels that communicate with the two corresponding nasal cavities. According to its edges, it is described two lateral edges, each one with the longitudinal furrow designated nasopalpebral, nasolabial and nasolabial according to the portion that one is studied. The other is anterior or dorsal edge of the nose, in which two lateral faces meet according to a line of variable form. These can be rectilinear, known as straight nose, concave form known as nose, or convex known as aquiline nose. Here are the names that receive the longitudinal furrow in its trajectory. The root, this corresponds to the interciliary space that binds the eyebrows and the forehead following a more or less marked depression, absent in the nose of the Greek type. The base is oriented downward in the case of the straight nose, something facing forward in the nose or a little backwards in the nose, aquiline. Here at the base is a middle septum which is semi-mobile, that is separating two holes corresponding to the nostrils. The nostrils are variable in shape according to the individual and race. Let's move on to the anatomical constitution that has the nose. This includes a skeleton, a muscular layer, an outer lining and an inner lining. Let's start with the skeleton. Let's see that this is formed by an osteocartilaginous frame and a fibrous membrane. In the bone part we will have the bones with the anterior part of the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, with the nasal spine of the frontal bone and with the anterior border of the palatal process of the maxillary bone. Now we move on to the cartilaginous part. Of these distinguishes three main cartilages and various accessories. The main ones are the cartilage of the nasal septum, lateral nasal cartilage and greater alar cartilage. In the accessory cartilages are the minor wing cartilages and the nasal cartilages accessory. Let's talk about the cartilage of the nasal septum. This is called because it prolongs the bony septum forward, filling the angular space between the perpendicular lamina of the ethmoid bone and the vomer bone, which we can see in the image, pointed purple to the bone ethmoid and green to the bone vomer and celestial color to our protagonist, the cartilage of the nasal septum, which by its position raises the back of the nose up and forward. It also extends from the nasal spine to the vertex. Here we can see how the nasal bones are related above: the posterior and upper ethmoid bone, the posterior and inferior vomer bone, the maxillary bone down, and with the greater wing cartilages facing and downwards. The red line represents the cartilage of the nasal septum, the gray part represents the lateral nasal cartilages and the part of celestial color to the greater wing cartilages, recalling that there is only one cartilage of the nasal septum. We continue with the lateral nasal cartilage, found in the number of 2 in the form of a triangular lamina. Its base, it is in the median line, is supported and continuous with the cartilage of the nasal septum. Its upper edge is attached to the nasal bone, its lower edge with the corresponding major alar cartilage. Its vertex, more or less rounded, is directed backwards and sideways towards the nasolabial groove. Nowadays some authors do not consider them as an independent cartilage, but they form the continuation of the cartilage of the nasal septum. The arrow points to the lateral nasal cartilage. The next cartilage is the major alar, which is configured in the form of a letter U. Its lateral pillar is the skeleton of the wing of the nose. Its medial pillar rests on the nasal septum. Its vertex forms the back of the apex of the nose. The arrow points to the alar greater cartilage. From this lower view you can see how they relate to each other, also with the nasal septum and above with the lateral nasal cartilage. Minor wing cartilages. These are small cartilages that complement the larger wing cartilages. They are usually located posteriorly and laterally, between the lateral nasal cartilage and the alar major, or lateral to the greater alar. The accessory cartilages. These are of variable form, being found from squares, sesamoid and vomerianus, depending on the place that occupy between the preceding cartilages or between these and the skeletal skeleton. Fibrous membrane. This one is between the free spaces between the cartilages, which is resistant, emanated from the periosteum and the pericondus that binds to the cartilages and the neighboring bones. The muscle layer. This is formed by the facial muscles inserted in the nose. Can be differentiated in two groups, dilating muscles that are the posterior nasal muscle and the anterior nasal. Also there is a group called compressor. The muscles that are related to the nose are the hero muscle, which mobilizes the frontonasal skin. The nasal muscle. The nasal septum depressant muscle. The elevator muscle of the upper lip. Outer lining of the nose. The skin of the nose is molded on the nasal skeleton and is separated from it by a celluloadipose layer, except in the vertex, the wings and the septum. The skin is also reflected towards the interior of the nostrils where it has rigid hairs called fimbriae. Another characteristic of the skin in the area of the nose is abundant in sebaceous glands. Internal lining of the nose. A part of the skin of the nostrils and the entry and exit of many microorganisms. The inside of the nostrils is covered with mucosa. Vascularization. Arterial irrigation comes mainly from the nasal artery. Originated from the ophthalmic artery and mainly from the facial artery. The drainage of the blood is constituted by the veins that drain into the jugular vein and the facial vein. Lymphatic drainage. Lymphatic pathways drain in the upper part towards the parotid lymph nodes and those from the lower part towards the submandibular lymph nodes. Innervation of the nose. This mainly given by two cranial pairs. The facial nerve innervating to the facial muscles. And trigeminal giving it sensitivity, the external nasal nerve, the infraorbital nerve and the internal nasal nerve.